Boats, one of the most ancient forms of transportation. Throughout time, they have transported people and products. They transported the Vikings from Scandinavia, the English to the Americas, but today we're going to talk about something a little different. One of the first boats. Egypt is a country in Northeast Africa where Africa and Asia meet. When you think of Egypt, you might think of the Great Pyramids or Cleopatra, but actually what is most important to Egypt is the Nile River.
This is the world's longest river. In regards to Egypt, it goes all the way through the country, from the very south to the very north towards the Mediterranean.
The Nile River is the main reason these Egyptian reed boats developed. They created them to use their sacred natural superhighway. They use these boats to travel within Egypt and to various African countries, trading along the river.
Unlike the Phoenicians, the ancient Egyptians did not have access to wood. So what would they make their boats out of?
They used a water plant native to the Nile Valley called papyrus. Making this boat required taking bundles of reed and tying them tight together in order to trap air. The tighter the bundles, the more buoyancy the boat would have. The Egyptians also began to create paddles for the boat to propel them and serve as rudders. They also began to add sails, which were probably large fronds set up by the bow. By around 3500 BC, the Egyptians replaced this frond sail with a sail more similar to the sails that we see today. This sail was made out of woven reed. It's clear that Egyptian reed boats are very ancient and a basis for many boats we have today. But how old exactly are these rafts? Well, that has not been dated exactly, but Egyptologists believe that these boats go back to hunter-gatherer times in the Paleolithic period over 40,000 years ago. One advantage of the reed boat was it was made out of a material that the Egyptians did not have to import, papyrus.
Additionally, many reed boats were actually a lot more powerful than they looked. Thor Heyerdahl, a Norwegian explorer, wanted to prove that ancient Mediterranean African people could cross the Atlantic to go to the Americas using something called the Canary Current. He constructed a reed boat he called Ra after the Egyptian sun god and based it off of ancient Egyptian reed boat models. He then set sail from Morocco to cross the Atlantic. This boat unfortunately broke apart after the first few weeks it set sail. Although the boat did fall apart, it went farther than many thought it would, going over 60 miles per day.
Although the larger and more developed reed boats may have been able to go longer distances, like what Thor Heyerdahl presented with Ra 1, many boats weren't able to go that far without falling apart. Around 3000 BC, the Egyptians started to really transition from reed boats to wooden boats in order to transport heavier and larger goods and go longer distances. An interesting fact is, although they didn't really need to, the Egyptians developed the wood boats so that they had the curve of the reed boat. Perhaps this ties into the cultural significance and the historic significance of the reed boat. Religion was very important to the ancient Egyptians. Egyptian society was surrounded by a complex system of over 2,000 gods and goddesses. This might be the reason why even the reed boats tied into their religion.
Most importantly, from the first Egyptian dynasty, the sun god was believed to have traveled across the sky on a reed boat during the day and across the underworld on a reed boat at night.
Pharaohs were also very important to Egyptian culture. These pharaohs were essentially the kings or queens of Egypt. These pharaohs were constantly depicted in large reed boats covered with gold and other artifacts. Last, but most important, these reed boats reflected the importance of the Nile in ancient Egyptian society. Because the Egyptians were so surrounded around the Nile, these reed boats had even more significance. It is clear that the reed boats reflected ancient Egyptian culture and were used to embrace it.